original up in the middle there. That was our wedding picture.
My name is Jerome Ferry. My cameraman is Alan Eggers. We're doing a video interview with Raphael Pisarik, a lifelong resident of Linn County in the Ivanhoe, Mount Vernon area. Raphael, tell us when you were born and where you were born.
Well, I was born on the farm in the country, on the farm that they call it Riverside Farm, about 2 miles down from the present Ivanhoe Bridge or the Highway 1,
What was?
Well, I was born on the farm on December 22nd, 1920, and at that time they didn't have to take the ladies to the hospital. I was born right on the farm, and I've lived there until I was 17 years old.
The location of this farm, for anybody that's not familiar with the area, this farm is located
where the
just
South
at
Cedar
the,
Park was.
just
where the
at
South
the,
Cedar Park is at the present time.
just at the entrance of the
Yes.
South Cedar Park. And what was your folks' name?
Joseph and May Pisarik.
And did you have any brothers and sisters? No.
I had one older brother by the name of Aloysius, or Al they called him.
There's quite a history of that place that you were born and raised on. I have a photo here I would like to have you hold up and show it this time. This
was taken approximately in 1890. My grandparents bought this farm in 1890, and they moved there in February. And my dad was born the 22nd of May, and he's just an infant there. So this was taken sometime during 1890. And as you can see on here, my grandfather is driving the horses. This is an aunt of mine by the name of Anna, standing there. And over here on the horse is my Uncle John Pisarik. My grandmother is here with a milk bucket. I think she was ready to milk a cow. And this is my Aunt Emma Pisarik. And holding my dad here was Josie. Well, they called her Joanna, but they called her Josie Pisarik. Holding my dad was just a very small infant at the time. And so that's how I presume that this was taken in 1890.
I understand that barn is still standing.
That barn is an original structure there, and that's what it looked like in 1890, and it's still standing in good shape.
And then we have a picture here of your...
Now this is a picture of my great-grandparents in Czechoslovakia. Well, at that time it was Bohemia, and it was run by Austria. Austria dominated that area at the time. And my grandfather and a brother of his had immigrated to this country. They're not on this picture. And my grandmother's name was Magdalena Kohut, and my grandfather's name was John Pisarik, sits over here. There was one brother that stayed there. His name was Joseph Pisarik. And the two ladies were Anna and Mary, and I don't know which would be which. My grandfather's name was James Vincent, and he came to this country with an older brother that was Matthias Pisarik. And they settled, James Vincent, he settled in the area here, got a job. And Matthias, he went over by Ely, and he settled around in the Ely area there. Now this is a picture of my grandparent Pisariks. And this is a full picture of my grandfather, James. His name was James Vincent. Sometimes they called him Vincent, sometimes they called him... Now wait a minute, I'll take that back. I think it was Vincent James, I think so the way it went. But they called him Jim. And this was my grandmother here. Her name is Catherine. And this was my Uncle John Pisarik. This was my Aunt Josie Pisarik. This is my dad standing here. This was my Aunt Emma Pisarik. And this was Aunt Anna Pisarik. And this was Aunt Mary Pisarik here. And these two ladies, they married brothers. Anna and Mary, they married Cole brothers.
Very good-looking family. How many acres was on this farm that your dad was?
When we owned it, it was 255 acres. Now, my grandfather, when he first moved there, I understand that he bought a parcel of ground at the east end of the farm that belonged to Horns. They used to call it the old Horn place. Now, Horns lived across the river, and they were the forebears of the Rotman family, the Horns. Philip Rotman married a Horn lady, and then she had some sisters, and they lived there, and there's still some old ruins of the farm there, not too far from where the Rotmans lived. And there used to be a house on the place, and I don't remember the house, but there was a depression in the ground. We used to call it the old cellar. And I don't know, for years, there was a cedar tree grew right along the fence line there. If it's still there or not, I don't know. I haven't been down there for quite some time.
I think it still is.
And this is a picture of my grandfather's farm when they first moved there, shortly after they moved there. And my grandfather seated here. This is my grandmother standing by him. This is my Uncle John. And this lady, this young little girl sitting here, that's my Aunt Emma Pisarik. And this is my dad here in the white. And evidently he was probably a couple years old by that time. And this, one of these ladies here is my Aunt Josie, and the other one is Aunt Anna.
What year do you suppose this have been approximately?
Beg pardon?
What year do you suppose this would have been?
Well, I would say from 1890, if my dad would have been 2 years old, probably 1892, something like that. Surmising.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about growing up in the 20s on a farm. Did your dad have the typical farm livestock, cows,
Oh yes,
pigs?
he had a regular hog, cow, corn, oats, hay, and we powered with horses at the time. Now, my dad had a bad stroke of luck shortly after they got married. They had 100 and some head of hogs about ready for market. They weighed over 200 pounds, and cholera hit them. And cholera was a very, very deadly disease, and I think out of something over 100 hogs, they managed to save 8 of them that survived.
That would have been devastating to your dad.
That really crushed him financially.
Yeah. How about cows? Did he milk cows for income?
Well, yes, we milked cows. I know when I was a little boy, my dad, he had 2 or 3 cows that we milked in the barn, more from the standpoint of home use. And if there was some cream, what was left over, they separated cream out of it. And I can remember I would go to milk with him in the barn, and I had to get in the manger. Of course, we didn't have no dairy barn or nothing. It was a regular cow barn. And the cows were broke that you could take a milk stool and sit down by him and milk, and he'd milk 1 bucket of milk, he'd set it in the manger. Well, I was waiting there, so I'd find myself a nice long stick with a straw, when they blew the straw in the barn. And I'd go down through the foam, and I'd be drinking out of that milk. I remember that. Boy, I used to love that. I drank all the milk I could hold.
Did your mother raise chickens?
Oh yes.
Ducks?
No, we had ducks. We had geese.
Sheep?
Yes, there were. My dad had sheep. He even sheared sheep in his day.
Yeah. Goats? Did you have goats?
Yes, we have. I got a picture over here of old Billy Goat. We called him Wilhelm. And my dad had the goat more from the standpoint. They used to claim that a goat was good to have in the horse barn. I don't know if you ever heard that story or not, but they claimed that horses didn't get heavy if you had a goat around. I don't know if that pew on the goat, if that kind of cut the anyway. But this old goat he was aged already. He had a huge set of horns, and he used to sleep in the machine shed. And one morning they missed him, and they went to look, and he'd lay down by the disc, and he got his horns tangled up in the disc, and he was laying there dead. He couldn't get up.
How about guinea hens?
We used to have, occasionally we'd have guineas. They used to do a lot of rattling.
What was the age difference between you and your brother again?
4 years.
4 years, okay. How about farm chores? Was there certain chores that farm chores you boys were responsible for doing?
Yeah, well, one of the main things was carrying the firewood, feed the chickens, and after we got big enough, we did some milking. My brother and I milked, and we used to go to milk, and we'd have a milk fight. We'd squirt milk at one another.
Or the cats.
Yeah, the cat would sit there, and he'd go, we'd be drinking milk.
You had mentioned in our pre-interview that your dad raised quite a few melons.
He did. My dad, he raised melons from the standpoint that he had something to market that way to help pay the interest on the farm loan. And he usually had anywhere from 4 to 6 acres of melons, but one year he went overboard and he had 12 acres. The worst part of it was the melons were so prolific, and my dad was alone, that he couldn't handle the picking and the sale of the melons. And of course, it just so happened when I was a kid, it happened during the Depression days. And he would pick a whole truckload of melons. We had an old truck that would hold probably from 100 to 110, 15 melons. He'd pick a load and he'd go to Cedar Rapids, and he'd come back in the evening. He had $5 for that load of melons. And he was happy because next day there was another load ready to go. And $5 was a big chunk of money in those days.
Was insects a problem back then?
Yes, we had a problem with cutworms were the first thing. Melons were a hand-operated outfit. And Dad usually went and he plowed with a potato plow. He'd plow a furrow out in the field. Then he took a manure spreader and he kind of hemmed it in, and he hauled rotten manure in them trenches. And then he covered it up, and that's where the melons were planted on that. And they were planted approximately, probably 10 feet apart between the rows, and I think about so many steps. I think we took about 6 steps, and then we dropped another hill. They had to be planted by hand. Well, that was, you planted them. Then in a few days when they come up, you had to check them to see if there was enough stand in the hills. If there wasn't, we had to replant some of them. We thin them. Usually when Dad planted them, we planted 5 or 6 seeds. We had all the seed he wanted because he saved it. And we'd thin them down to three good husky plants. Then we'd come around, had a few days, and the damn cutworms would get in there. And you'd see a melon that was all wilted laying down there, and you'd see just like a little tiny mole thing around, and we'd go in there with our finger and we'd follow him up, and when we got him, we put either that or he died a better death than that. We took him down to the farm pond, and we was catching bullheads with him, using them for bullhead bait.
Did you ever, did your dad have any problem with people stealing his watermelons?
No. Of all the years, he said he missed one melon in the patch, and Dad always told the boys in the neighborhood, and anybody said, if you want melons, he said, come to my place, I'll give you all you want. I think my dad gave away about as many melons as he raised. On a Sunday or Saturday, people would come to buy melons, and there was a butcher knife and a table there, and cut melons, musk melons, all they wanted to eat. A lot of times they'd buy maybe 50 cents worth of melons, and the whole family ate melons while they were there, which was fine. They were welcome to them.
Yeah.
Now, Dad would save melons when he found an extremely good melon. He wanted to save for seed. With his thumbnail, he would write seed on it. Well, that generally stayed. He didn't go to market. And he said one time he missed one of them out of the field. He said the only time he ever missed a melon. And years ago, a lot of the vandals used to come and they tear up the melon vines and plug melons and kick holes in them and stuff like that. But Dad's always said, you boys want melons, come to my place and you can have all you want. No questions asked, for nothing.
Did you ever see your dad taking and wrapping his knuckles on a melon?
He'd wrap them, but after he picked about so many melons, he could look at a melon, it was ripe, or else he'd turn it over, and on the bottom side it was a nice golden color. There was a third way that you could tell a melon, but that wasn't very good. If you just leaned on it a little bit, it would crunch. But outside of that, after Dad picked about so many melons, he didn't even mess around. He just picked a melon, and that was it. And they were always ripe.
Yeah. Do you have any memories of thrashing oats?
Oh, you bet.
Shocking.
Yeah, I didn't get to do much shocking when I was a little kid until after I got up to about 15 years old. And thrashing, of course, from the time I was big enough to handle a shovel, I was put in a grain wagon, and I had to level the wagon off so it wouldn't run over, And well, that as soon as they started thrashing, that of course, fella kind of looked forward to that. Then there was a goodie connected with that. Boy, you always had good. You had good around that. And they generally had either lemonade or pop, what they bring around for a treat.
The farm ladies would put on this large.
Oh, they prided themselves with their cookery and with their baking.
Try to outdo each other.
That's right.
Yeah. Did you get a chance to go around with the ring as they went from farm to farm?
I went around with the ring.
You were the official grain wagon watcher.
Generally, because that was a job, but you were welcome to that because they didn't have to take a man for that. And see, a kid could do that if you watched a little bit and moved the grain around a little bit. And well, when the wagon was so full, they took it away anyway and unloaded it.
Mm-hmm.
And after I was about 15 years old, so some of the neighbors started wondering if I couldn't come around and help haul bundles. And I recall in one place there, I come and this old fellow, he was a real big fellow, and he was pitching. We had what they call spike pitchers. And I had the team, and well, I drove up to a row of shock, and normally they threw him on a bundle at a time, and he punched into the shock and heaved the whole shock on, took the horses by the bits, took them over to the next shock, and before I even got straightened up, he had a second shock hitting me there. And my load didn't look like very much when I come in. I was ashamed of it because everybody built a nice high square load as high as they could pitch, you know, and I come in, it was pretty bobtailed.
They took pride in how nice the load looked.
That's right, that's right.
Did
and you had to make a good load or else some of it slid out sometime when you were going to the part of the field if you had a ditch or something like that, and you had to build it pretty good, but I didn't lose any because I didn't have that much on.
Another job that was probably required every year, you probably burned wood for heating in your stoves.
That's all we burned was wood.
What did you do? Set a certain time, so many weeks aside to go and gather wood?
Generally, a lot of the wood was kind of made as you needed it. But now my dad had a wood saw. He had an 8-horse gas engine and a wood saw mounted on, I've got a picture of it over here, mounted on a wagon chassis. And he did a lot of sawing in the neighborhood, custom sawing for the neighbors. And some of them probably have 20 cord of wood on a pile. Some of them sold some of the wood, some of them burnt that much wood. And
did you set a certain time of the year aside to
well, generally in the fall they'd cut a certain amount of wood, and in the winter if they were running short, well, they just go in the timber and they cut more.
Mm-hmm. Was your mother, was she a good cook?
Yes, she was.
Remember,
good baker too.
Remember being a good cook?
Yes, she was.
Yes. Your grandmother came to live with you when you were...
In 1932, my mother left us. She went back to Chicago. She was a city girl, and living in the country didn't exactly appeal to her too much, and the times got hard and everything, and, well, there was some dissension in the family, and so she went back to her folks in Chicago, and so my grandmother came to live with us, and she lived with us for about 6 years, and until she got to the age where the aunts didn't want her to be around anymore. We didn't have running water, we didn't have a inside toilet or anything like that, and she was getting pretty feeble by that time, so they took her to Cedar Rapids, and she lived with one of my aunts until she passed away then.
Did you mention her name?
Beg pardon?
Did you mention your grandma's name?
Catherine.
Catherine?
Catherine.
Yeah. Was she a good cook also?
You bet. Yeah. You betcha. She could cook, and she could cook with the miserablest wood. Like I say, sometimes you cut wood after you run out, so you cut it as you need it. Green wood. And she'd put it in the oven, and she'd dry it out a little bit, and man, she could bake with that and cook, and she was a good cook.
She'd still have supper on time.
She could fry fish, and she could make game like you wouldn't believe it. Well, my dad at one time, and this was back in the Depression days, there was a couple fellows from Mount Vernon come out, and they just begged for a job. And Dad had a lot of corn to pick, but he said, geez, fellas, he said, I don't have no money to pay you. Oh, don't worry about that, just give us a little bit. So he gave them 1.5 cents a bushel for picking. You had to pick 100 bushel to make $1.50, and which they rarely did because it was in the late in the fall, already cold. They'd come in after they got their first load. They'd come in around noon, and it was warm in the house, so they had a miserable, maybe a couple of sandwiches, and nobody ever left my grandmother's house hungry. She had a big pot of coffee on, and she had beans, and she had potatoes there, fried potatoes, and they ate good when they come in.
That must have been quite a culture shock for your mother coming from Chicago
It was.
to a farm down in the middle of nowhere and by a river.
Yeah, and then of course my mother's dad, he died when she was a little. She got killed in a warehouse accident when she was 8 years old, and she was the oldest in the family, and there was 3 little brothers. My grandmother had to go to work because there was no other means of income, and my mother grew very dominant. She run the roost, and when she got married, she thought she was going to do the same thing. And of course, they was altogether different. This was a casual type of life out here, and the people they weren't exactly such live wires that you might think, they took kind of things easy and slow, and they didn't believe in getting too serious about things. You done what you could today, and tomorrow you do some more. Well, it was a little bit strenuous for her, and eventually it kind of worked on her enough that she went back then.
I have a photo here, a very interesting looking photo. Who are these two gentlemen?
This one, on this side, they call him Squire Wolf, and he was one of the ancestors of the modern Wolf family that lives in Mount Vernon now. This other one was a Václav or Wenceslav Verba, and he was an uncle of my dad's. And this fella, he was in the Austrian army for 12 years as in the heavy artillery. And when he come to this country, when he finally was able to come to this country, he come after the rest of the family had come, and he was not a young man anymore. And he married a Civil War widow that had 5 children. And her husband got killed in the siege of Vicksburg, and her name was Kleinecht. And she was an original lady from around Solon. Her name was Zenishek in her maiden days. And then after my dad's uncle married, they had 3 children. And it turned out that one of them eventually owned the ground what the Catholic Church sits on in Mount Vernon, Joe Verba. And Julian, his son, donated that land to the Catholic Church there.
Mm-hmm. Your farm, your dad's farm, was located right on the Red Cedar River.
Yes.
Did you and your brother, your dad, did you spend a lot of time on the river in your spare time?
We spent as much as we could. I did anyway, because anytime I had a chance, and of course, I grew up with the old-fashioned way of fishing. We called it a Bohemian fly rod with a spear. And we had some old-timers in the neighborhood, and they showed me how to get fish that you couldn't even see them. Somebody else wouldn't even know they were there, and they showed me how to get them. And when I was about, as soon as they would allow me to go to the river and caution me not to fall in, I'd go down and I'd usually spear 2 carp and I'd bring them home. I didn't want to get too many because next day I could go again, see. And man, we had fish. We had a lot of fish.
This was food on the table.
Yes, sir, bet. It was.
You didn't probably have the opportunity to run to the grocery store every day.
Well, no, you didn't do much. The only thing you bought at the grocery store was coffee and maybe some sugar and flour, because flour was not available anymore. They didn't have no mills or anything around, but it was very, very, very scarce what you bought in town.
Did you have the good fortune of having an old wooden boat or something on the river?
Yeah, my dad, he built a boat. He built, the fact is he built a couple of them in my time down there until I was able to buy a metal boat. But Dad, he was quite a boat builder, and he built a pretty good boat.
Did you ever get as far as Sutliff?
Oh, yeah.
When you were young like that?
Yeah, not on the river. But I remember going to Sutliff when I was a little boy. There was a lady there by the name of Mrs. Beasy, and she run the store at the time. And she had a glass case there, and there were several stuffed critters in there. There was a loon, a horned owl, a goose, and a couple ducks. And of course, when we were kids, that's the first thing when we got in the store, we run and we was looking at all that stuff in there. And I used to be deadly afraid to cross the bridge. That bridge rattled and banged and everything, and I used to bawl. When we crossed that bridge, I'd bawl. I thought I was going to fall in. And many years later, after I was married, I trapped on the river. I trapped from Sutliff down to Cedar Bluff with a boat. And I could hear that bridge rattle 1.5 miles down the river on a clear November afternoon. As I was drifting down, you could hear somebody get on that bridge go, column, column, column. The old plank was loose, and they flipped like that. They had that bridge off limits for nothing over 4 ton. And I've seen they'd haul 2 big gravity boxes of shelled corn and a big tractor pulling it, and they'd go over the bridge, or else they'd move a combine across the bridge, no hesitation, and the bridge is still standing.
You remember your first gun?
First one?
Your first gun. I'm sure you had a gun when you were young.
Yes, I did. Well, my first gun, I have to admit, was a BB gun. Got for Christmas. And I was a pretty small kid, and I found great delight in finding targets. I was shooting ornaments off the Christmas tree. And that wasn't a very that wasn't very that wasn't had no blessing to it from the family. However, the first rifle that I ever had was, of course, in those days in the Sears, Roebuck, and Montgomery catalogs, we called them wish books. You could buy a single-shot .22 rifle for about a good one for about $4.50, which was a terrific amount of money. Then they had a little one in there. It was right next to a BB gun. They called it a Hamilton, $2.75. Well, we would ooze and we'd drool, you know. And finally, my maternal grandmother come out from Chicago, and she thought, well, gee whiz, them kids, if they want to hunt, they might as well hunt. So she bought us one of them little Hamiltons. It was very accurate, hard shooting, but some of my uncles used to come out from Chicago, and they'd hunt around Thanksgiving. They'd come out rabbit hunting, and they brought a chalk box full of some kind of an old .22 cartridges. They were pretty badly corroded. Of course, we shot them in that thing, and they were not like a long rifle. They were an extremely long. We call them extremely long rifles. And as a result, when we shot, we tried to open it up, and then the ejector wouldn't work. So my dad, he made us a wire. You'd shoot, and then we took the wire and punched him out and put a new one in and shot again. That was our first gun. Then after I got a little older, my dad bought us a 410 shotgun, and we could buy shells for that for 69 cents a box, 25 shells, 2.5 inches. And after that, I saved up a little money, and I bought a single-shot Remington rifle, and shortly after that, I bought myself a repeating Model 42 Winchester 410, which I still have. Mm-hmm. And well, from then on up, we had different calibers of guns, and we did quite a little hunting.
I imagine you did a lot of squirrel hunting.
Yes, squirrel and rabbits.
You lived in an ideal place for
I can't believe it. You know, we hunted. We rarely, practically never hunted off of the farm. And in a winter's time, we'd probably kill anywhere from maybe 60 to 75 rabbits on the farm. I always laughed. I said, by the time spring come, you couldn't say rabbit and smile at the same time because you were so damn full of them that they were disgusting.
Did you hang them on the clothesline or hang them up someplace?
Well, we did
let
to
them
some
freeze.
extent, but we more or less kept fresh ones coming in all the time. We could go hunting off there that way, and we got to be good. You know, we hunted in cornfields where corn was checked with a wire. And there was a lot of sandburs on the place. There was a sandy ground, and them rabbits, they liked to sit in them sandburs where it was protective. And we'd walk along, and a buddy would go up, and before he'd get from here to the window, we'd come up with that 410 bang, and we had him. To this day, I don't dare to do that with a 12-gauge shotgun, or I don't have nothing left.
How about pheasants? Was there a lot of pheasants at that
no
time?
Pheasants.
Yeah.
Quail.
Quail?
A lot of quail in them days.
How about doves? Did you hunt doves then?
Don't put this down, but we would shoot a dove occasionally, but we didn't really hunt them.
Was there quite a few doves?
Oh, there was doves like you wouldn't believe it. There was a certain kind of a plant grew along the river, along the sandbars, and it grew up about so high, and it had like a bean pod on it. And it had probably 3 or 4 seeds in that, and them doves, they just thrived on that. So once in a while when we were hunting squirrels and we didn't have any mounted squirrels, we'd bring a couple of doves home for soup.
Yeah. There wasn't any open season on doves then. How about foxes? Was there a lot of foxes?
No, foxes practically. There were some gray foxes, but a red fox was almost non-existent.
Mm-hmm. How about geese?
Well, there was not like today. The geese were rare because in the fall there'd be probably a flock of geese light on the river, and in maybe a day or so somebody found out there were geese there, and they'd be shooting at them, and they'd move them on down south. In the spring, there was geese, but they were high. They'd be going over north. Nothing like now. We have residual geese here now, and to the point where they're a nuisance.
Did you ever have the opportunity when you were young like that to bring home a goose? No.
I never shot a goose until I was practically married.
How about ducks?
Oh yeah, we shot some ducks. We used to get some small ducks, teal and stuff like that, on the ponds and stuff like that.
Did your dad like to hunt and fish with you?
Oh yeah, he was quite a hunter and fisherman both. He could swim like an otter. And that's one thing I never really learned to swim was too good.
He didn't make sure you knew how to swim, spending all that time on the river.
Well, we spent a lot of time around the river, and of course they used to fish with trot lines. We'd get out with the boats on the river. I remember our livestock used to once in a while cross the river and go on the north side, and we had a cow that had went across the river and had a calf. We wanted to get the calf back home. Well, the river pretty wide right there. Rowed the boat across and got the cow down to the water with the calf, caught the calf and set it on the back seat of the boat and started rowing on. Pretty soon the cow started following and the cow swam across the river after us, and we were worried to try to crawl in the boat. But we got across the river and that got the calf back home.
How about deer, Raphael?
No deer in there.
No deer. Beaver.
No beaver. The first beaver that come along was in about the latter part of the 40s. It started showing signs of beaver along the river, but up until, there was no season until, I don't know, about 48, I think we had a season on them.
Did your dad or you as boys have a trap line?
Oh yeah, we trapped more or less along the river at home. And, of course, one of the most prominent things we caught always was a skunk. And I remember catching a civet cat one time when I went to school, and I got pretty well polluted with it. I wasn't exactly teacher's pet that day. But now skunks, that was the backbone of the industry in them days. We'd catch an occasional mink, maybe one or two in a season along the river, and a few muskrats, but there was no coon to mount. Possums, there's a lot of possums. We'd get possums like that.
What'd you have for pets in those days? Did you have
Well,
dogs
we had a couple dogs on the farm.
Pony?
We had a pony. I had a Shetland pony, and once in a while we'd come up. We had 2-3 pigeons one time we had for pets. My brother had a bandy rooster, what he prided very highly. There was Joey Levitz's grandmother, Joey Levitz's mother, gave him that bandy rooster, and he was a very colorful thing. Mean little son of a gun. If he got in a fight with an ordinary rooster, he'd kill him right off the bat because he had spurs on him like that. And he'd come and fly up under that rooster like that, and the old rooster was going around right away and blood spurting out of him. And, well, my brother would take him out in the field when he took water to my dad when Dad was working in the field. And he took the rooster with him, and so the rooster wouldn't run away. He put him in the furrow and covered his legs with dirt. And when he come back, the rooster was waiting for him. Well, then it got to the point where he killed 2 or 3 of my mother's good roosters, and so he went in the soup kettle.
You had mentioned pigeons before. Did you ever have pigeon soup?
Oh yeah, we had a lot of pigeons. That was a common fare if we could get them.
Mm-hmm. Turtles.
Oh yeah, we had turtles, both kinds, soft and hard, and snappers. And there were a lot of turtles in those days. The worst of it was people would come fishing down there, and they'd have a 22 with them, and they'd be fishing, and pretty soon old turtle stuck his nose out. Well, the turtle would go down, and 2-3 days later he'd be crawled out on the bank and all bloated up, couldn't use him. Well, people thought they were doing a good thing by getting rid of the turtles, but we got turtles. We didn't catch them as much as in later years after we learned to go with the probes and stuff like that, catch them by hand, but we caught them on the lines and stuff. And occasionally we'd find one in the field where he was crossing. I know one time we was going to school, and man, we found a big turtle on the way to school, and my brother, I don't know what happened, but we got him home that time. I think he turned around and went back home with him.
Did you take a lot of baths in the Cedar River in the summertime when it was beastly hot?
Yeah, there was a lot of bass there, and season was closed on them. And of course, we were kids, and we took a magazine. They called it what the heck was the name? It cost a nickel. I can't remember what the name of it was, but anyway, we looked in there and we could see some of these lures the way they were made. So we took a tobacco can, we cut out a piece about like that and bent it, poked a hole in the middle and put a wire through it, put a hook on the end and a few feathers on it, and on the end we made a loop, and them old bass would be around the bank there somewhere, and we'd cast out and start. That's a deadly lure because he'd go poof, 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 poof on top, and wham, boy, they'd come after it. Yeah, we caught some bass.
And what I'd asked you was, in the summertime when it was beastly hot, did you go down to the river to take a bath? That's what.
Oh yeah, we used to swim off the sandbars. Usually about haying time or session time, we'd go down, and we had a sandbar there. It was safe, for quite a. And there was a little pocket next to it, kind of back off and we'd take a mini net with us, and we'd drag that out, and we'd get probably 3 or 4 fish enough enough for a meal for us.
How about the winter of 35 and 36? Does that have any special memories for you?
Yeah, 36 was a wicked one. I was going to high school at the time, and I didn't get to school for 5 weeks because the roads were plugged, and the story was the county wouldn't come across Ivanhoe Bridge with any kind of a snow removal because they said Ivanhoe Bridge wasn't safe enough. And as a result, we tried to open the roads ourselves. I got a picture of it here. There's a whole group of the neighbors shoveling snow. We shoveled for 2 days and we made some headway. Then we got one heck of a storm and everything blew back more than what was in before because everything filled up. In 2 weeks we finally made it to the Highway 1 where, see, there used to be a store down here at Ivanhoe. And we finally got, in 2 weeks we finally got there, and then we started getting soft and we only had a wide enough for one track. And we got muddy and we couldn't travel anyway.
Yeah.
So
who owned that Ivanhoe store at that time?
there was a family by the name of Earl Cole that operated it. By Herman Piper owned it. I've got a picture of it here. I'll show you.
Yeah. In the wintertime, especially 36 when it was so cold like that, did you folks have any trouble keeping your house warm enough?
No, we had a furnace and we had wood. We had a wood burning cook stove. And one of the nicest things about it was I couldn't go to school, but we lived close to the river. And me and Dad would go on the ice, and we'd come back. We'd have a gunny sack full of carp usually, and we'd spear them through the ice.
Did you ever ice skate on the river in the wintertime?
No, I never learned to ice skate. That was one thing that you had. The skates in those days were them clamp-on skates, and we on an overshoe you couldn't clamp them on. And our shoes, if you clamped them on, the dang soles would come off. And so I never really learned. I had skates. They bought me skates, but I never learned to skate.
How did you get around in the wintertime like that? Did you have a regular farm sled that you hooked horses to? Or?
Well, yeah, Dad, he had a bobsled and a team. We traveled with a team around the farm and like that. And of course, the road was blocked. You couldn't go anywhere with that.
Did you ever go into Mount Vernon with the sled to get groceries?
I can't remember of ever going to Mount Vernon with a sled.
Country school. So where did young Raphael go to country school?
Pleasant Hill, where Joe Edelmans lived there. And that's where my dad went through school for all the years. And that's where I went through 8 years of school there.
And I'm sure you walked.
Oh, definitely. Well, I had a pony in later years. I had a pony that I could ride.
But when you did walk, how many miles was it?
Well, depended which way you went. If you went around the road, it was about 1.5 miles. And if you went cross country over the hills, it was probably 1 mile, maybe a little short of 1 mile. But it was a good mile over the hills.
When you're reminiscing with your grandchildren, how far is it? Do you exaggerate any as to how many miles?
I tell them about the same story. I can remember when I was a real small kid, my dad would take us to school with the bobsled, and it would be cold, bitter, bitter cold. And well, he had a wagon, he had a box on the sled, and we had a big cowhide robe, and my brother and I would roll up in that and get down below the wind, and we were fairly warm, but if you looked up, man, it just cut your face. And Dad would take us to school with that and back. Well, not back, but generally we walked back.
Did your dad ever heat up rocks in the oven and put them in the sled?
No, we never did that, but I've heard of it being done, bricks and stuff like that. Or else they take in the old days when they traveled with a buggy or bobsled or a cutter, they took a lantern, kerosene lantern, lit it, and then they put it between their legs and they covered it with a blanket.
Your teacher, remember your teachers in country school?
Her name was Martha Bartosh. Taught all 8 years that I went to. A wonderful, wonderful lady.
And she would she have traveled back and forth from Mount Vernon?
She walked from Mount Vernon, from the north side of Mount Vernon. When the weather was fit, she walked from Mount Vernon to school and back after school was over. We could consider that she had to walk almost 7 miles one way. And in later years, when the weather got real bad, so she had an aunt that lived back in the hills inland there, and she would go for the week to stay at the aunt's. Then at the end of the week she'd go home. Later years she bought a Model A, a 1930 Model A, and she drove that.
Did you Have to haul the drinking water to the...
You bet. We used to get that down at the Edelvet's farm, and we had to walk about, short half a mile to get to the place. And usually about 10:15, the teacher would appoint two of the older kids, girls or boys, and they take the water bucket. We had a 3-gallon bucket that used to be, they used to call them coffee buckets, kind of a narrow bucket with a lid and a bail on it. And we'd go for water. And the reason the teacher did that, because 10:30 we had recess. And she figured if we fooled around someplace and took our time, we were going on our own time after 10:30. So we always try to make it a point to get back before recess started.
That was always a good duty, though, wasn't it? Especially in the spring of the year when the weather was nice to get out of school.
And then in the fall one time, one of the farmers, they were farming along the road there, and they planted pumpkins in the field, and Halloween come along, and man, they had some huge pumpkins there. So me and one of the boys that went after water, we rolled a pumpkin out on the road, and we rolled it back to school. It was a huge pumpkin, made a jack-lantern out of it.
Outhouses, you remember the outhouses?
Oh yeah, we had a his and a hers.
Did you ever have anybody tip them over at Halloween time?
No, they didn't. It seemed like they didn't bother in those days in that area.
Did you like school?
Well, yes and no. And naturally, there was other things the fellow could have been doing besides going to school. But actually, to go to school, it was a pleasant thing because we got along with the kids, and the teacher was nice, and you had fun in school. You played, and so it wasn't really a detriment to a person.
Who was your remember your classmates' names?
Yeah, Leonard Brolick was one of them, and Virgil Crofter was the other. And then us three boys were in the same class, same age, went through country school, went through high school together.
How about the girls?
Well, some of the girls, Leonard Brolick had two cousins. They come to school with us. They were 2 years ahead of us. And then there were other kids. There was some kids that moved into some of the areas there. In the winter, their folks cut wood for Piper and helped in the logging. And they were poor. They were terribly poor. And the kids would come to school and they were dressed very shabbily, and they didn't have much to eat for lunch or anything like that. Well, it was kind of a sad thing,
Other than the incident with the skunk, did you or any of the boys ever get in any trouble at school?
Going to school?
Get in any trouble going at school?
Never got into trouble, but we got a pretty good stalking to when we was all stunk up. I'll never forget, I caught a civet in a trap, and there was a field a little ways from the schoolhouse, and something dug a mound out. I think a badger dug a mound of dirt out. Of course, you seen that right away, and I was a trapper, so I went and I set a trap in the hole. That was the only way you trapped in those days. Found a hole in the ground, you set a trap in it. So a couple of days later, I come by, and here's a civet caught in the trap. He's sitting in the hole looking at me, and for the pony, I had a kind of a homemade whip, and I had a handle about like that out of wood on it, and then I had a piece of sash cord tied to it for a whip. And so I just took that thing, and I reached down off the pony, and I whacked him on the head, and boy, he stepped back in the hole, and I'd have been all right if I'd have left him alone. But I got a hold of the trap chain. I'll give him another one. I pulled him up, and I hit him again, and he cranked around, and boy, he just come right up my pant leg. And of course, I wasn't the most favorite pupil that day. I think I took off everything but just about my pants and everything because I'd leave it outside. And the teacher was worried, so the superintendent wouldn't come to visit. We had a county superintendent, and about once every 3 months, she would come out and visit us she had a route to visit the different schools. And she was a nice lady, but the teacher was worried because she didn't think it would be very nice to have her come in the schoolhouse which smelled full of skunk.
What was the remedy back in those days? Did you have any remedy to try to lessen the
medical remedies?
Yes.
You betcha. When I was a kid, I used to get croup and congestion on my lungs. Well, flopped you in bed, and they put a flannel on your chest and fried up a skillet full of hot onions, slapped them on there, and then they covered it up to kind of breathe some of that stuff. Boy, after a while, you was coming loose. That really worked that stuff out. Yeah. That and castor oil. And, of course, we dreaded that damn castor oil. We hated that stuff. And Well, outside of that, with the exception of different, they used to use goose grease and stuff like that, like for sores or stuff like that. They had some kind of a salve what they used. That those home remedies.
Yeah, and we were talking about when you got sprayed with a skunk. Was there anything that you could do at that time to lessen the odor, to get rid of it from your body?
You could have burned your clothes. That's about the only thing.
Well, I had heard using
yes,
tomato juice.
Now you use peroxide, and you mix it up with a little bit of detergent and stuff, and that'll cut that stuff pretty well. I've got a rather recipe for that here, and it does work.
I never heard.
But in them days, you didn't know nothing about that. You just suffered it out.
Yeah. How about did you chew when you was a kid? Chew tobacco?
No.
Smoke?
Tried it. You didn't smoke tobacco. Well,
did your dad smoke?
Yeah, he smoked a pipe.
Yeah.
He smoked a pipe. He also chewed tobacco to a certain extent. Not bad, but he used to chew tobacco, and they used to the plugs. He always chewed plug tobacco. They used to come out. They had a horseshoe, little silver horseshoe stamped in them, or else they had a red tag. They called it Climax. And when he'd get done, when he'd pull that off, he put it in the barn always in the back where the horses stood. And I remember seeing that. There was probably 20, 30 of them things stuck in the wall there.
But you never
Star. There was another one with a star. It had a star on it.
Mm-hmm. But you never had the urge to try it.
Never tried to chew though. Not until after I was married. Used to go around thrashing or baling hay or something like that. We chewed a little bit to kind of keep your mouth loosened up.
In the dust in your throat. Did you ever try smoking sourdough seed in toilet paper or newspaper?
We try to smoke whatever was available that made smoke. And in later years, then after I got up to about 15, 16, I tried to roll my own and never had no luck with it. I'd get about so far and the damn thing would bend over. And you could get the papers for nothing, and you could get a package of Bull Durham, I think, for a nickel or something like that.
How about Christmas? Do you remember any Christmases at home?
Well, yeah, it's Christmas.
When you were a kid?
It was quite an occasion. It used to be that go to bed in the morning, Santa Claus was there. One time the weather was real bad, and we hung up our stockings, and the next morning, instead of anything in them, there was a dime in each one of them. Santa Claus couldn't get there.
Did you ever go out and chop down your own tree? And
when I was a kid, I didn't chop my own tree down, but I'd go in the timber. We had quite an area of timber there, and some of it was fairly open. There was little cedar trees growing on. I'd find a cedar tree, and I'd walk around and make a mark. Then I'd have my dad go down with me, and he'd cut the tree off and bring it home.
And what would your mother left around about when you was 12 years old?
Yeah.
Was she a good cook when she was?
Oh yeah, she was a very good cook.
What did you normally have for Christmas dinner? Wild game
goose was the main fare in those days. Never heard of a turkey. I never had a turkey until I was married. A goose or chicken, one of the two, whatever. Usually a goose for Christmas for an occasion like that.
Did they used to save the goose grease for do anything special?
Well, they even use it for cooking. They save it for cooking, and they didn't throw nothing away in them days. I remember when my grandmother lived with us, so we were out of lard. And it was in the fall, coon season was on, we happened to get a coon by chance. And she took the fat off that coon and she baked pies with that. Finest pies, boy, that crust just crumbled to your touch. And it was good, too.
4th of July, was that a big deal on the farm?
Yes, it was. In later years, my dad would give us a certain amount of money and we would buy the fireworks. And I hate to say this, but I got to snitching on my brother. He had a sack of fireworks put away, and once in a while I'd take one of them out of there. And I don't know if he missed them or not, but when I look back at it now, I kind of hate to think of it.
Memorial Day?
Pardon?
Memorial Day?
Well, I remember one time for Memorial Day, they used to have occasion. They used to come down to Ivanhoe Bridge, and they had a service there, and they shoot the guns off, and then they threw the flowers in the river. My dad rode my mother and me and my brother. He rode us up the river 2 miles that time, and we waited off on the side to see the service. And then after it was over, so when we went down, we were drifting right along with the flowers. The flowers were going. I remember that. I was just a little kid that time.
How about Halloween?
Well, Halloween you didn't do nothing on Halloween.
Farm kids didn't.
There was no trick or treating. There was no trick or treating in the area until my kids got up to the point. And then they started trick or treating, and they come to neighbors, and neighbors didn't know what it was all about. But after they come once or so, they always invited them back. Come again next year. And of course, the kids, they knew the good places. They were very generous. They didn't give them a piece or two of candy. Hell, they dumped a whole sack in what they had. I'll tell you a story. One time, my sister-in-law, she was just a kid, not much bigger than some of my kids, and they went trick-or-treating, and they went down to Leo Woods's. And they come and they knocked on the door and trick-or-treat. Well, Leo said, "Oh, I don't know. What do you mean trick-or-treat?" "Well, if you don't give us some treats, we'll trick you." So I said, "I ain't got nothing here to give you." So they went in and they set the candy on the table, and my sister-in-law, she went in the bathroom, got a bar of soap and soaped the windows, and when they left, they forgot the damn candy on the table.
Did your dad ever make homebrew wine? Or?
Yes, he made it. He used to make wine, and he used to make home brew. I know one time he made a batch of home brew, and he bottled it, I think, a little bit on the green side, and we had it in the basement back of the furnace where it was cool. One night we heard pow in the basement. Man, we went there in the morning, and one of the bottles exploded, and it didn't take one long, several. And that was a mess in there. That damn stuff got all over the floor, and we had to clean it up. And after that, I don't think Dad ever made home brew again. We used to make root beer at home. They used to get a bottle of this root beer extract, and we make root beer and bottle it.
How about butchering? I'm sure.
Oh, that was quite an occasion, butchering. They butchered. Usually, it was a neighborhood affair. They'd butcher here one day, and then they'd go and butcher somewhere else the next day. And sometimes a day or so afterward, they'd follow up and they'd cut the meat up. And usually, my dad was quite a butcher. He worked on that, and sometimes he'd butcher for some of them people. And when he'd come home, he'd have a nice slice of fresh meat. They'd send a side cut off the pork, off the ribs or something like that. He brought it home. And that was another thing when they butchered. So our job was to cut the skin off the lard and dice it up, and then they'd render it. And that was our job always. We had to skin that damn lard out and cut the lard, the green lard, the lard up, and they'd render it.
How was the biggest share of the meat preserved?
Well, the common way of preserving it was if you had maybe a 20-gallon crock, and when they rendered the lard, you poured the lard in there, and then they fried They put the meat in a big pan and roasted it in the oven, and then they put the meat in there covered with the lard, and that would preserve it. Another way was some of the neighbors had a smokehouse. They'd smoke their hams and bacons. And my grandmother used to make salt pork. She'd cut the fatty pork off the belly, and she'd put it in salt, and she'd make that with beans.
Was there any special pieces of meat, like the tails?
They ate everything, but we never ate lungs out of the pig. We had just about everything but the squeal.
Do you ever recall your dad roasting the tails in the oven and
tails?
Then eating the meat off the
Well,
tail?
they didn't roast them. If they cleaned them, they usually put them in with beans. They made beans with them. Beans, and my mother used to take the nose, the snouts, and she'd cut them up and she'd cook them, and she'd put lima beans with them, and boy, that made a delicious dish.
Tongue?
Yeah, we always saved the tongue, the liver, the heart, kidneys. Not out of a pig, but out of beef kidneys.
The ears?
Oh, yeah, ears.
Yeah. How about the brains?
Oh, you betcha, that was a delicacy.
Did your dad, was that a delicacy as far as he, or did you like it yourself?
Everybody had it. To this day, I just love hog brains if you can get them.
Mm-hmm. Rodents, were they a problem back then?
Yeah, rats.
Rats?
We lived close to the river, and sometimes there wouldn't be a rat on the place. We'd get a high water, and by the time the summer was over, the damn things were almost carrying us away. So they'd come down the river. My dad always said they'd come down the river. And I remember when rats got so bad there for a couple of years, they went out in the cornfields and they made like little villages, had holes in the ground, and of course we trapped the hell out of them, whatever we could. And my dad we were supposed to get a nickel bounty, but he didn't always have the nickel to pay us. But we used to catch rats like you wouldn't believe it. And then another thing about rats, our corn crib was set up on timbers, and you could look under it, and it was 7 feet across it. And on the back side, the mole rats would be sitting there like that. Well, we just itched to get them. So Dad, he made us a spear. And first he just took a kind of a heavy lat, and he put a number 9 wire and sharpened it, and worked up the rat, and we'd ram him again to the other side. Then we took a gas pipe and beat him to death in there. But then Dad got a different idea. He made a barb on that spear. We'd whale it into the rat and pull him out. Man, he'd go. Then he wouldn't let us shoot him with a rifle because he's afraid of fire. But then he bought us a Daisy air rifle, one that you cocked underneath. That was the end of the rats. Boy, we could hit them, and kill them. And it stunk in that corn crib. Man, oh man, them rats, we couldn't get them out, and we just shoot them and leave them laying there. And there was a lot of rats in them days.
Was there anything as rat poison?
Never dreamed of using it. Now, that's another thing we had to work on with ground squirrels. Them striped ground squirrels, they would dig out corn in the spring. And we had a dog, and I had the pony, and I had a cart, and I would put 2 10-gallon cans of water on the cart, and I'd go around in the hog pasture, and I had the dog on a leash, and if I found a hole, I'd let him smell in it. If he made an attempt to dig, I poured water in, pretty soon out come the ground squirrel. Of course, the dog was there. Or another thing, them damn ground squirrels, if we didn't want to drown them out, we'd find the hole where they were, and we'd take a number 1 trap and set it, and upset it on the hole, and when he poked his head up, you had him. My dad used to say when he went to school, the kids used to do it on the schoolyard. They took a fish cord, they put a knot in it. Now on one end they left a little end, and they put a knot in that and a nail, and they put it down over the hole, and then they'd watch when that old ground squirrel stuck his head out. They'd give it a pull, and they said, boy, that old ground squirrel would go around.
You had mentioned, as far as killing rats, you had mentioned by using cork that you fried.
My grandmother she'd take cork and she'd fry it in lard, and then they'd set it out, and with the theory that the rats, when they ate it, they couldn't digest that. And she also did it for mice. She'd have some kind of an old pan, and she'd put cornmeal in it, and she'd put lye in it. And she claimed that they'd run over that stuff, and then they would get that lye on their feet, and they'd lick that, and then that would supposedly kill them too.
Was your folks, were they church-going people? Was Sunday a special day?
Oh yeah, church was quite a thing in our day.
Where did you go to church?
St. Peter and Paul.
That was probably, 3-4 miles from your place?
It was, across the field it was 4 miles, across the field. Went around the road, it was probably about 5.5.
Did your dad have an automobile? In the early years? Yeah.
Well, he had I think the first automobile he ever owned was an old Cadillac, what he got. And then after that, we had a car, they called it a Columbia. And I heard of only one instance that there was somebody else that had reference to a Columbia car. It was an open car, a touring car. It had a Continental motor in it, good little car. And then after that, they bought it was an Oldsmobile, it was an old Oldsmobile. We had that. That was a good little car.
When was the first time you got to drive? After you was in high school?
I didn't drive a car for quite a while. My brother was a driver, and I was supposed to stay out of it.
Okay. Your dad, they probably didn't need driver's license back then.
Not in those days. Fact is, I can remember when I bought my first driver's license, you didn't have to have them at first, and then they come along, you had to get one. So I had to get one.
You mentioned St. Peter and Paul's Church. That was a Catholic church that sits up on top of a hill out in the country in a beautiful scenic setting. And they have the cemetery right across the road. Do you remember who possibly is the oldest residences of that cemetery? How far back it goes?
I have history here that there's a fellow by the name of Tobias Fickish, F-I-J-K-E-S, I think they spell it. And he was buried there in 1863, and he was supposed to have been the first one buried in a cemetery. And the stone is still there.
1853.
1863.
You grew up during the Prohibition days. Was there any bootleggers in the neighborhood?
Very, 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 very many of them in the area. Nobody considered it anything out of the way to be a bootlegger, but if you got caught, then they figured you should have been a little bit more careful. You were careless. I can remember, now I don't remember this, but my mother used to tell about when I was a tiny boy, there was revenuers come out to our place and they were looking for a still. And, well, what was you going to do? They come out, they had a certificate to look for the damn still, and so my mother said, well, go ahead, and my dad said, go ahead, and so they looked everywhere. They even looked in the toilet, in the bottom of the toilet, there was nothing there, but no still by no means. And when they finally got done, so they got to looking at the paper again, they said, oh, we got the wrong place. This was supposed to have been a fellow, it sounded like Pisarik, but it was, altogether it was similar to it, but it was not Pisarik. Well, they left, and that was the end of that. But now, when you mention about bootleggers, people used to come fishing, and they always brought something along to drink, either wine or alcohol or something like that. And they used to come to the river, and, well, we ought to have something to drink. So everybody threw a few coins in, and they went to the local bootlegger. I won't mention names. And they'd come back, and they'd have a half a pint of alcohol, 35 cents. And they'd mix it with water, and everybody took a drink. I remember one time I was 15 years old, and they were fishing on the ice through the ice on the river, and I happened to go down there. I think it was on a Saturday. A nasty day. It was sleeting a little bit, cold and windy, cloudy. And the guys, they said, we ought to have something to drink. So they all threw a little money in the pot, and just north of there, about half a mile, there was a bootlegger lived in the field. So they went there, and they come back, and the old-time alcohol used to come in cans, gallon cans about that high, and kind of a narrow can and had a small bung on it. And they didn't have it full. I don't know how much they had in it, but they had some alcohol in it. And when they got back with it, so somebody said, you bring any water? Why, heck no, never thought of water. Well, give me the can. So they went in the hole in what they had open for fishing, scooped the slush ice aside and dribbled about so much water in it and shook it up, and everybody took a drink. And I don't know if the water killed alcohol or the poison, or the alcohol killed the poison in the water, but nobody died.
What did your folks do for entertainment back then? Did the families get together for parties, or? Yeah,
they used to go visiting. Go visiting to the neighbors or something like that. I remember we used to go down to these Jim Crofters. They lived down the river from us. Maybe you knew where Don Rhyme lived. Don Rhyme's farm there down the river. Anyway, there was a elderly couple, and they had one son. He was about the age of my dad. His name was Gilbert. And, of course, the lady was a very, very exceptionally good cook and baker. And I was just a little kid, and she always, it was customary when you come visiting, they'd bring out some goodies, you know. Either the man would bring out some wine for the men, or the lady would bring out some bakery. And I was a kid, and, of course, I kind of sweetened up by going down there, you know. And, well, I was sitting there, and of course, when we were kids, there was nobody else to visit. You had to sit and listen to the old people visit. And I got kind of impatient. I blurted out, I am hungry. Oh, the lady jumped up right away, and she went in the kitchen, and she come back, and she had cream puffs. Oh, she made the most luscious cream puffs, and things were about that big around, and you bit into them. You had to be careful, or else that there custard would squirt out, you know. And I could just feel icy stares coming from my mother, drilling right through me. Boy, when I got home, I was told, don't you ever, ever, ever do that again. I'll never forget it either.
Your farm was surrounded with country roads. How did they keep these roads in shape? Did they have any type of upgrading?
Okay, that's a good question. Years ago, somewhere in the area, certain fellows had a contract that they would drag the roads when they got rough or like that. They needed some maintenance. The Elovetses used to have the contract for that. And they had a drag. They called it a king drag. It was a big, heavy iron thing. It was, I think, about 8 feet across. And you could, you could had a lever on it. You could get the pitch so it would cut or level, or then you could hook up on the chain with. You could slant it this way or slant it that way. Well, anyway, after rain and when the kind of dried off enough that it was fit that they could do a little good on the road, we'd hear the dogs bark. Of course, we were at the tail end of the road there, and when they come down around, we called it the little hill, for about a quarter of a mile, they had to come on open ground, and we'd look, and here comes 4 horses pulling the drag. One of the Elovetzes was on it. It's either Milo or Joey, the one fellow just passed away. And usually they'd come and then they'd make a U-turn there by our place, and they'd stop and they'd rest the horses. Well, that was visiting time. Also, their dogs used to come with them, and we had dogs. Well, the dogs, pretty soon the dogs started smelling around, growling, and they were rolling under the horses, and the horses were dancing, and of course there was some language that wasn't fit to be printed from, you know. Everybody was scolding, and they finally get the dogs out from under the horses, and in due time they took off and they went on up the road. And well, you didn't do no bang-up job on them, because about all they did was knock the top of the ruts off a little bit. And then they used to have what they called poll tax, and that was from the county levied, and all males, I think over 16 or something like that, were supposed to pay poll tax. It amounted to a few dollars, but you could work it off. And generally one of the township trustees would come out and they'd set a day, and all the farmers that wanted to work their poll tax off, they would go and they'd either bring a team and a dump scraper or shovels or an axe or something like that, and probably a ditch to fill in, or maybe some kind of a log to move or a tree to cut. And you're supposed to work 2 days at that. I think it amounted to $5 or $6 for the poll tax. If you didn't work it off, then they charged it to you on taxes. They included it in your tax list. And that was one way of having a little maintenance. Of course, most of the time they visited anyway. You know how you get a bunch of guys together. First thing they're talking and visiting, but they did get some work done.
I can imagine in the spring of the year when the frost went out, the roads had to have been in terrible shape.
They were terrible. Now, where we lived there by the river, you could come, there was a county, and that was a county road at the time. You come in and you come just before you start up the hill by Crows. They call it going over High Rock. There was a road there, and you'd come down over the hills, down through where the campground is now at the South Cedar, and down and right around the farm. And then we got by the farm, it went due south, and come out on what is now the Ivanhoe Road. Mm-hmm. That would come out there, and that used to be used exceedingly in the spring because that held up, and people wanted to get to town. If Elovetzes where they lived, they had one terrific hill to fight. That always got muddy as the dickens. Mm-hmm. Then when you went over and down Pleasant Hill, past where Howard Crow lives now, that used to be another bitch. That used to be muddy there. And that hill didn't used to be beveled off like it is now. When you were going up the hill, you got about so far, then it almost went straight up for about 40, 50 feet. And if you got that far with a vehicle, that was as far as you got. But anyway, they'd come around our place that way, and they could go over High Rock, and they'd make it. And they got on the bottom there, and it wasn't quite so bad.
Probably it had more of a limestone rock base.
Yeah, and then it wasn't used near as much. Yeah. It had good drainage to it, and it didn't get churned up and muddy like the other roads.
How about radio? Did you have a radio on you early on?
In very later years. My brother was about maybe 12, 13 years old when radio started coming in the neighborhood, and they were the old either wet battery or the what they call them hot shot types. Mm-hmm. They were run by batteries, and my brother was quite an electrician, and he had a know-how for radios. And we'd come to visit somewhere, and they'd start talking, well, how's your radio working? Oh, I can't get nothing. All it does is hums and buzzes and this and that. And so my brother would speak up. He said, would you mind if I look at it? Well, if you think you can help it, go ahead. So so some of them radios were that long, they had a lid on them. He'd put the lid up and mess around with it, and pretty soon start tuning. By the way, pretty soon you got music and stuff. Well, what'd you do to it? Well, it needed adjustment. And of course, people they weren't mechanically minded in them days like now.
How about telephones? Did you have a telephone on the farm?
We had a telephone.
Party line?
Yep. Yeah. Even back when my grandparents moved on the farm, there was a telephone there already. Mm-hmm. We had a Lisbon phone. They crossed the river down by just above where Jim Crofters lived. They come, and there was four of us on the line. There was two Crofters, Leo Woods, and us. We were on the Lisbon phone there.
And everybody probably listened whenever there was a ring.
You betcha. You had a code ring, and when you heard your ring, you go and answer it, and you could generally hear receivers being picked up on the down line. And if you could almost hear them when you picked up your receiver, pretty soon you couldn't hear nothing, because those things were powered by a wet battery or a dry cell battery, one of them batteries like that. And people didn't replace the darn things. And as you picked up, it weakened the. You'd have to say, "Would someone please hang up so I can get the message?" So then you'd hear click, 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 and pretty soon it got a little stronger. You could hear what they were saying. Another thing, invariably, some of them ladies, as soon as they'd hear a ring, they'd listen whether it was their ring or not. And, of course, sometimes if you listened in, you could gossip too a little bit. Then they used to have what they called a general ring. Ring, 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 ring. Ring, 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 ring. About 3 or 4 of them. And that was an announcement. Either somebody needed help somewhere, or there was a sale in town, or some kind of a public announcement or thing. So everybody was supposed to listen to that. They called that a general ring. If you wanted to get through to another line, you had to call through Central. And you had to call Central, and then she would plug you in on the other line.
Did you make it a point to point the mouthpiece up towards the ceiling during the electrical storm?
Never paid no attention to that.
You never had fire come out of the mouthpiece when the lightning struck the line.
Another thing, Sutliff store used to have 2 telephones. They had a Solon and they had a Lisbon. And if we wanted to go to Solon, my folks, if they wanted to go visiting the Solon or something like that, instead of going through Central, they'd call down to Sutliff and they'd relay the message for them, free of charge.
One of the services they offered.
Yeah.
Okay, let's get Raphael into high school. Where did you go to high school,
Mount
Raphael?
Vernon.
Mount Vernon. And were you active in sports?
No, I wasn't active in sports because we had a problem. Transportation was a problem for me, and my dad said, "I think you better depend on getting an education instead of playing sports." I'd like to play basketball if it would have come about, but I did some basketball playing like in tournaments or like that at the school. But see, that's another thing. You had to wait and practice after school. There would have went my ride if I rode with Virgil Crofter quite a little bit. I rode with the Brody girls, and if I'd have had to depend on them for rides, practicing, I wouldn't have been able to do anything.
Raphael, I need to jump back here in time a little bit. You were telling about I was asking you about if you ever met any interesting people on the Cedar River, floating or boating on the Cedar River, and you was telling us about this gentleman.
This old Kaufman. And the story goes, when I was a small boy in the later part of the 20s, so this old gentleman used to come down the river. He started in Cedar Rapids. And the story went that he was a fairly wealthy man in Michigan. He grew up, he had a family and a wife and everything. And the story went that they kicked him out after he got about so many, after kids grew up, they kicked him out, so he kind of took to the river travel. He would get to Cedar Rapids, and he had a scissors grinder, and he'd sharpen scissors and sharpen knives, make enough money to buy some old boat, a little equipment, some food. And ours was the first stop that he made coming down the river. He'd drift down and he'd park by just right next to where we lived there. My dad and one of the neighbors, Virgil Crofter's dad, they built a shanty there along the river. And that they used to call it the shanty. And that was where he usually parked, by that shanty. Then he would set up and he'd fish for a few, 2-3 days. He'd fish, and he'd walk to Mount Vernon in the neighborhood. He'd sharpen knives and scissors, and he's usually a pretty good fisherman. He'd catch a bunch of catfish, dress them, and he'd take them to town and he'd peddle them wherever people would want to buy them. And for bait, he took about a 4-foot square of minnow net, and he took a real pliant willow and tied it across this way and then this way, and then he put a cord in the middle and a pole, and he'd put cornmeal on that. He'd set it out in the water, and after a while he'd raise it up, and he had all the minis he wanted on it. I even seen him bring in carp about 6 inches long. They were feeding on that cornmeal. And that one year he come down, and he just drifted down, and he needed a set of oars. So he went down in the bottom below the house, and he cut an ash tree down that was about, probably that big around, split it, by night he had the prettiest set of oars made that you'd want, and that's what he used. And his itinerary was, he went on down the Cedar at intervals, hit the Mississippi, he'd end up in New Orleans for winter. He'd stay in New Orleans over winter, he'd bum his way back on a railroad train, on a freight, start in Cedar Rapids and come down again. He did that year after year. And the last time he come down, he was 82 years old, and he was getting pretty feeble. And we never seen him again after that. So evidently that was the end of his travels.
Did you become quite close with him over the years? Did he make it a point to come up and visit with you?
He would visit with you, but he was a fairly independent gentleman. I asked him one time about fishing. He used to tell us that when he lived in Michigan, he said there was a lot of lake sturgeon there. I said, well, how big would they get? He said, I've seen sturgeon. He said they had them in a wagon box. The head was at the front of the wagon box. The tail was hanging out the back. That's a big sturgeon. I said, what'd they do? Did they eat them? He said, oh, no. He said they put them in a metal, some kind of a big metal container and let the sun render the oil out of them. And then they used that for harness grease. And that's the story he told about that.
Okay, back to high school. Did you have a girlfriend in high school?
Not really. No. There were some of the girls I liked to went with, but they weren't too compatible, and the ones that were kind of wanted to go with me, I didn't take to them exactly. And no, there was no romance going on in high school.
How about the Palisades Park? Does that hold any memories for you?
Yes, at the last day of school, we always had what they call Pal Day, and we go out there, and that was free time. You could have a picnic, and generally what we did, we got it right out there, and then we would take a hike down the river as far as we could go at the trail, and then we'd come back. And I remember my first Pepsi Cola I ever drank. I drank at the place there. The Bittermans had a kind of a hotel there, and they sold pop and stuff like that. It was quite a noted place. Yeah. And I think I bought a 16-ounce bottle of Pepsi Cola there. I think I got it for a dime.
Did Biederman at that time, did he have his boat?
Yes, he did.
In canoes he rented out?
Yeah, he rented out. He had a boat livery there. Yeah. He'd also take people out. He had a kind of a speedboat. He'd take them out for trips on the river. They'd go down, and about that time, see, the dam was built already. You couldn't get below the dam. Incidentally, when they built that dam, there was a family lived over here where Doug Brockle lives. And the fellow's name was Pete Cavanaugh. And he worked, the WPA project was on, and they were using the labor for building the dam. And he'd go down as far as Brockles, then he'd walk down to the river. And they crossed, he had some kind of a makeshift thing to cross. The river was high, and by golly, he fell in, he drowned. And he was 33 years old. He was married. He had either 2 or 3 little tots at home. That was a tragedy that time. Yeah.
Do you have any other memories of the park?
Well, yes. On this side of the river, we were just talking about it today, and I happen to be in Ely. They asked me about this. There used to be a tavern down in what they call Spring Hollow. And if you recall the name of Henry Minot,
yes,
he was a Civil War veteran, and when he come back to this area, he had one arm gone. And he lived on the river, and he had a cave on the Palisade side there. He had a cave what he lived in. But then in later years, he married, and he built this tavern in Spring Hollow there. And it's not too far from the river, and it's there was a road down to it. And when I was about 5 years old, my parents drove down in there that time, but I don't remember the tavern. I don't know if it was there anymore. But see, this would have been built in probably 1870, something like that. And the foundation is still there. And then just below it, where the water comes down out of the spring in Spring Hollow, they had a place where they propagated trout. And they had basins in there where they had different places, and they were using that water in there to raise trout in there. They're still there, but they're getting pretty badly grown into vegetation and like that. The foundation is still there from the old tavern.
This would be just not too far below Howard and Margaret Hall's summer home up on the cliff, up on the bluff.
Well, it would probably be not too far down, not too far down.
Mm-hmm.
It's easier to get there if you go on the river. Of course, you can't go up over the dam. If you ever go over the dam,
Yes.
But if you go up until you get into Spring Hollow, you know where Spring Hollow is? And if you stop and if you just go in, it's not very far from the river. And this old fellow that used to be in Ely, his name was Louis Dolezal, he told me when he was a kid, there used to be a fellow from Ely run that tavern after Henry Minot was out of there, Minot. And he said they used to go down there, and he said you could stay overnight. And of course, they was a tavern. They sold liquor and stuff. And he said we used to hunt and we'd fish, and then we'd stay there overnight. We'd kind of make a vacation out of it.
When did you get your first car?
My first car?
Mm-hmm. When you were in high school?
Yeah, I was out of high school already. The first car that I bought, I bought it in, let me see, I graduated in 38. I think about 39, 1939 I bought my first car.
What kind was it?
It was a 1934 Ford V8, and I think it was a 4-door.
This was...
I paid $285 for it, and it took me a year to pay for it. I had to buy it on time payments.
Did around this time the Depression...
Beg pardon?
I said around this time the Depression settled in on everybody. Probably when you were in high school and after you got out of high school.
Well,
you probably...
the Depression was on. The depths of the Depression were actually up until about 35, and then, of course, then they just kept right on. It was still Depression.
Yeah. What year did you graduate from high school?
38.
1938. Yeah. Did the Depression hurt your dad?
You betcha, he lost the farm on account of it.
He lost the farm that you...
The farm, the mortgage come due in 32, and there was no money forthcoming of any kind. They wouldn't renew the mortgage, and so he lost the farm. 255 acres for $10,000. Now you look at $10,000, you don't even buy a decent car for that. Because the whole farm was could have been salvaged for $10,000.
By this time, when you graduated from high school, had you made up your mind that's probably what you were going to be, was a farmer?
I wanted to be a farmer and be independent. There was a professor in Cornell College. I think his name was Sam Williams, if I'm not mistaken. And he tried to talk me into going to college. Well, there was several things against us. We didn't have the money. The other thing is, my mother was gone, and my dad and my grandmother lived together. And that was a kind of an obstacle. And then the last one was, I wanted to be out of school. I wanted to be on my own. And that determined, that cinched the job.
Mm-hmm. So when your dad lost your farm, what happened then? Did he...
Well, for about 2 or 3 years, he managed to rent it. And that was the dry years, and he rented it on share, and the ground was sandy. We had the nicest field of corn in one place, and one of the neighbors one time remarked, he said, Joe, he said, you got one of the nicest fields of corn there, never picked a ear of corn out of it. It got hot, and it never pollinated. The stalks were there and everything, there wasn't a damn ear of corn on it, it didn't pollinate. Well, the landlords looked at it, you're not raising anything on there. And so after about 2 or 3 years of farming like that, they wouldn't rent it to him anymore, so we moved off.
And then where did you move to?
Up in the hills there where, yes, that's the farm there.
Would you like to hold that up?
That's part of the farm, and I've got a picture of the house, but it's over at John's getting blowed up and then clarified. Yeah. This is a picture of, we had a bunch of cattle on the farm. My dad's riding the horse there.
Now, did he rent this?
Yeah, we rented this. Mm-hmm. Terrific rent of $450 for the farm, but it was very badly run down. There was no fences on it. The ground was poor, just completely worn out. And it was even hard to make the rent on it. That was in 37 when we moved there.
Okay. Did you ever get to Cedar Rapids when you were young?
Once in a while we'd go to Cedar Rapids. See, my uncle and aunt lived in Cedar Rapids, and sometimes we'd go there when the circus was unloading. The circus unloaded right across the street from them. And, of course, that was quite a thing there. We'd go and we'd watch the elephants and all that stuff, how they were unloading the circus off the train and like that. And never got a chance to go into the big top or anything, but it was interesting just to watch them. Yeah. Those elephants, they'd get behind of a wagon, they'd get the wagon mired in the mud and get his head again and push her right out, you know. It was quite the thing. Yeah. And of course then a certain amount of shopping, like for clothing like that, they had to take us to Cedar Rapids, but not very often.
Did you ever get to go to any movies when you were?
Well, we had movies in Mount Vernon once in a very, very great while. We were in Cedar Rapids, and maybe there was a movie on. My dad would take us to a movie. I know one thing what we used to look forward to. They had a place there. They used to sell goulash, and you got a big bowl of goulash for 15 cents and a couple of slices of rye bread with it. And boy, that was a treat for us. And that goulash was delicious. I never forget how good that tasted.
Do you remember what the name of the place was?
I think they called it the Three Deuces with Pola's, and there was a Three Deuces on First Street, I think, right next to where the old post office used to be, across the street from there.
When you got out of high school, was there any jobs to be had?
Well, I got out, let me see, I got out in
38.
The following year after I got out of school, so Herman Piper come down. He had the sawmill down here at Ivanhoe, and he said, "Hey," he said, "I could use you for a few days if you want a job." So I went down there. I got $3 a day for 10, 11, 12-hour day, whatever they quit. And I worked 10 days. I got $30, and I bought a suit. I bought a pair of dress shoes, and I bought a hat for $30. And that's not no lie. And it was all wearable stuff. And I learned a hell of a lot. They had a big steam engine what they run the sawmill with, and I come down there and, well, you give me the job. I was supposed to clean up around the mill, clean up the rubbish and stuff, and, well, they were sawing, and that damn steam engine, every time they saw into a log, it would throw out sparks. Just when I smelled something burning, and I looked, and hell, here's my shirt smoking. Just when I smelled something burning, I had a straw hat. My straw hat was on fire. So the next day I didn't wear no shirt. And of course, you had a spark ball and you just rolled right off. It didn't hurt you. And occasionally, they had a big sawdust pile, and it dried out a little bit on top. And a spark would light in there, and then it would start smoldering. And probably for a day or two, it would smolder and burn out about like a bushel basket. And every once in a while, old Herman said, "Well, get up there and put that fire out." So I took up a shovel, and I would have to crawl up on the sawdust pile and scattered out so it wasn't burning. And man, we hauled cordwood, and I helped chain logs in the timber back because they had a Caterpillar tractor. And it was an interesting job. It was a learning job.
Did you ever help pave the?
Yes, I did. I helped
the old highway.
No, I helped from the county line on Highway 1. They paved little over 5 acres, or 5 miles through Solon, to the south side of Solon, and we worked on that in the spring of 1941.
It wasn't Highway 1 then, was it?
No, it was 261.
261.
261. There was a time when it was 161, but I don't remember just exactly if it was before 261 or if it was after. I think it was after 261.
Originally, it was called the Military Road between.
That's it.
Iowa City and
yeah.
Dubuque. Mm-hmm. How about the Ivanhoe Bridge? Did you ever get involved with helping on any?
Well, I worked with the piers. Mm-hmm. I helped board the piers on that thing. It started in August, and well, the job folded up in December after Pearl Harbor.
That would have been the Ivanhoe Bridge number 2, the second.
Number 2, yes. Mm-hmm. And the story how I got a job on it. We worked for the paving gang, Dad and I, and they were slave drivers. Oh, they were slave drivers. Well, they wanted us to go. The next job was at Parkersburg, and we had enough of the paving gang. They wanted us to go with them, which we didn't. Art Myers went that time, and he said, "Heck, you're lucky." He said, "It was wet all the time, rain all the time." He said, "What I made on this job," he said, "I ended up there, and some of the guys borrowed money from him. Then they couldn't pay it back. Well, he was out." Well, anyway, in August, first part of August, so I heard that they were going to be hiring for building the bridge. So I went down there that morning, and there was quite a bunch of guys. There was, I think, about 12 of us come down. They was going to hire 3 men. And the boss come out of they had a kind of a shed there, they called it the office. And he come out, he said, "Okay, you fellas, line up here." So we got in line, and he just looked down the line and said, "I'll take the 3 on this end." and I was one of them. And two other fellows were from Solon here. And so we worked all the way through until we worked together on it. It was a, now those were gentlemen to work for, considering what the paving gang was. The bosses were good. They never chewed you out if you didn't do something right. If you didn't do something and you couldn't just quite get it, they'd show you how to do it. And they had a little fellow there by the name of Ira Jesse. He was a foreman, and he was up in his 60s already, strong as leather. He was a little fellow, and he said, "Boys," he said, "don't never lift with your back. He said, always lift with your legs." And he could get a hold of a 30-foot piling, and he'd get down and squat down like this, and he'd raise it up, and he'd raise that thing high enough to get a chain under it. And to this day, I still tell my boys and grandkids, I said, don't never lift with your back, always lift with your legs. And that's how true that was, you know. And the superintendent of the job's name was Howard Crawford. And he wasn't a very big guy. After we had the piers, the forms for the piers and everything, he'd walk across on a 4x6 on them damn piers. There was nothing under you except a heck of a big hole. And boy, he was a steady man.
Did they halt construction on it during World War II? Did they stop building on it during World War II?
Well, they finished the piers, and shortly after Pearl Harbor, around Christmas time, they poured the last pier and they folded up. And that time, Art Myers and a fellow by the name of Joe Schindler, they had a wheel to cement out into the river. It was one of the river piers. And they had a kind of a track made out of planks and stuff, ramp. And they had these, we call them Irish buggies. They had two big wheels on it. They put a cement. It was heavy. My guy, one got away from it, went into the river. I don't think they ever retrieved it. And one other time when they were working on the bridge, so they had steel sheeting, what they drove for a cofferdam. And when they got done, so they put the drag line on it with the boom, and they pulled them out. Well, they hit rock with that one, about 3 or 4, but they must have broomed them at the bottom. And they were pulling all of a sudden, bingo, the cable on the boom broke. Come down, and this one fellow that was hired on with me, Jack Smith, he was tending, he was hooking the chain and everything. He said he looked up and he said, I seen that cable, I seen that boom coming down, and he just done like this into the river. And it didn't hit him, but the boom hit on the pier, and it busted the boom. But they took that all apart. See, that comes in sections, and then the next day they had the thing going again. Mm-hmm. He's lucky he didn't get hurt that time. Then in later years, them things stood in the river there for years and years, and then in later years they cut them off with a torch.
When Raphael decided to go courting, who was your first girlfriend?
Well, I met a young lady in Cedar Rapids at CSPS Hall at a dance on New Year. Well, it wasn't New Year's. It was at a dance that was there. I met this young lady and I made acquaintance with her. And I went with her for probably four or 5 months, and then
what was her name?
Mary Catherine Cousimore. And her dad had a big apple orchard there on the east on Otis Road. Mm-hmm. Have you heard of it? Mm-hmm. And well, she was a nice girl and everything, but she didn't want to get very serious. And well, we kind of parted ways. And then I was going to Cedar Rapids with different things, hauling with the truck, and I was hauling wood to there's a bakery shop on F Avenue there. And there was a young lady worked in the butcher shop there, and her dad used to come around buy livestock out in the country. His name was Frank Yelesny, and her name was Frances Yelesny. And I courted her a little bit, and well, she was busy in the shop there. She didn't have too much time or anything. Well, then on New Year's Eve, on January 1, 1942, I went to a New Year's Eve dance in Cedar Rapids at CSPS Hall, and I met Elizabeth. And well, that was a...
One thing led to another.
That was that ended up in 54 years of marriage.
Mm-hmm. And you ended up with quite a large family.
We actually had 12 children. We lost a little girl in infancy.
Mm-hmm. Had you discussed having a large family, or is this just something that happened to a good Catholic family? had you discussed having a large family, or is this something that
before we
just
got
happened?
married, we discussed having kids, but we never dreamed we were going to end up with that many.
Can you name them all?
Did we?
Can you name all of the children?
Yes, we did.
Can you remember their name? What were their names?
The kids?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, Denny's the oldest, Francis is the next one, Teresa's the next one, Larry's the next one, Pat is the next one, John is the next one, Kathy is the next one, Mark is the next one, Ron, Steve, and Mary. And then the little girl's name was Christine, and she was born in 1955. Mm-hmm. So she'd have been just about a year younger than Kathy.
Very good. And where were you living at this time?
Well, when we first got married, we lived on the highway. The house is burned down there now. They've got it for sale there. How would I describe it? Do you know where McMahon's live?
Mm-hmm.
Just before you get there, there's a kind of a grove off on the right side, a maple grove. And there was a house there. Well, we lived there for some years. Well, we lived there 2 years with my dad after we moved out of the hills. Mm-hmm. When we got married, we lived there 2 years, and I farmed some ground in the area where I could rent from it. Then we moved to where David Tiroff lives over here. So we lived there for 3 years, and then we bought the farm and we moved on to that.
Yeah. What you call the home place now.
Yeah.
And this is your wedding picture.
That's it.
What did you say? What year this was when you got married?
November 23rd, 1942.
What church did you get married in?
Holy Trinity in Walford.
Mm-hmm. Why Walford?
That's where my wife worked. She worked for some people there, and that's where she went to church. just over the county line in Linn County. Mm-hmm. The Benton County comes right up on the one side of the road, and then the other side was the church.
When you lived on the home place on Ivanhoe Road, did your dad move in with you at that time?
My dad lived with us all the time, from the time that we were married until the time he passed away.
You and your dad must have been very close to each other.
Yes, we were.
Yeah. How big of a farm was it?
There was 161 acres in it when we bought it, and I sold 12 acres off. The county park bought 12 acres off of it.
Mm-hmm. That was kind of hard to raise that large of a family.
It was. I did a lot of other things besides farming. We run a sawmill for a good many years down at Ivanhoe. We had our own sawmill for 20 years. I sheared sheep. I baled hay, and I did everything like that. We cut logs in the wintertime and cut wood. We did a lot of trapping in the fall. That was trapping and hunting for fur. And well, just a lot of other work, whatever come along that would offer some income. So we did it.
Mm-hmm. And then you also bought and sold furs.
Yes, I did for about 20 years.
Is in having this large of a family, was it a problem with having bikes for the kids and sleds for the kids, or?
Well, we generally got along with it. They didn't have too many bikes because we were out in the country here, and there was no place to go around with a bicycle. Hmm. As far as sleds go, when we moved here on this place, this little shed I got over here, we took 22 sleds out of that to get rid of them because wife used to go to garage sale and she'd pick up sleds for little or nothing, and well, by that time we didn't need sleds like that anymore. We kept a certain amount of the good ones. We got rid of the ones that were quality.
I can imagine with a large family like that, Christmas and Thanksgiving was quite an
occasion.
Probably still is quite an event, and everybody comes home.
We used to go to midnight mass at St. Peter and Paul's Church, and the older boys, they kind of were getting to the point where they were getting shaky about Santa Claus. They said, well, all we do when we go to bed, you put the toys under the tree. So we had neighbors live down the road here, George Falcon and his wife Hannah. I used to store when we bought toys, we didn't have room enough in the house where we lived, so we'd store them down there. They had an empty room in the family, they were just the two of them. And we'd go down there usually a night before Christmas sometimes, and George, he just loved that, putting toys together, and Hannah, she'd have a meal for us afterward. And so I told him, I said, well, now, when we're going to be in church, would you care to come and put them toys under the tree? Sure. So when we come home, so when the kids come in the house, all of a sudden, wow, Santa Claus has been here. And for a while they were believers again. Hannah even took the goose. We had a turkey. Elizabeth was roasting a turkey, and she even took the turkey and she was basting it, and took care of all that. And that was another thing. Elizabeth would have a turkey in the oven. We'd come from midnight mass, and she'd take it out to try it. And between me and my dad and the older boys, she almost had to take the club, or else we'd have the turkey gone by morning.
With that large of a family, did you have a lot of accidents?
No, I can't say we did. We had a few broken bones and a few things, but never nothing serious.
How about infections, stepping on nails, and...
Well, I can't say that. Elizabeth was the one who stepped on a nail shortly after we got married, and she used to run around barefoot. She was quite a tomboy, and she stepped on a nail. Well, I heard of the old remedy, get a good warm cow flop. So I took an old overshoe and I followed the cow around, and I got a good warm cow flop and put her foot in it, and when she walked around, a little pinhole in the overshoe, and every time she stepped, it would... Well, after it cooled off, I got another hot batch and put her foot in it, and the next day her foot was just as white, and all the infection was gone. And I told the doctor about it. He said, he said, you should have never done that. I said, why? She could have got lockjaw, because that's where you get lockjaw out of animals, whatever. But it cured her.
At one time, you had quite a large fur business going.
Yes, I did.
What was the peak number of animals you would have skinned in any one year?
Well, I didn't know about skinning because we did a lot of skinning. However, in later years, I couldn't handle all the skinning myself, and there was a family lived over here by Ely, and I used to take furs up there, and they used to skin them for me.
Yeah. What type of animals are we talking about?
Mostly coon.
Coon?
Coon was the biggest thing, and then muskrats, and there was a certain amount. At one time, there was quite a few foxes, and some beaver. I bought beaver from fellows that used to go to Arkansas and trap beaver in the rice fields, where they were a nuisance. And I know one time one fellow come back, I bought 150 beaver from him.
How would you store these pelts? Did you have some kind of a cooler?
I
to
had
put
a
them in?
big walk-in cooler, and I could freeze them until I got ready. And I had an outlet. I took them to Chelsea, Iowa. There was a big fur dealer there, and I actually bought for him. And I was on a kind of a commission basis with him.
Was your kids into hunting and fishing like you were, in trapping?
The kids interested?
Were they into it like you were when you were young?
Oh yeah, the kids more or less, they all did some trapping until they got to the point where they were involved in school too much or going to college or like that. But even today, Steve is quite a coon hunter yet. You probably did a lot of coon hunting in your spare time?
Yes, I did. When you were young?
When after we got married, the coon weren't that plentiful when I was a kid, because coon were fairly rare. But the last probably from about middle of 40s on, they started to escalate in numbers, and we got a lot of coon.
And I can imagine every fall when the weather started turning cool.
Oh boy, we look forward. We tried to get all the farm work done that we could, so I could go trapping and coon hunting like that. We generally took a week time and we trapped on the river with boats. My dad would come from up above to Sutcliffe, and I'd go from Sutcliffe to Cedar Bluff. And we caught a lot of fur, but the fur at that time was fairly cheap. It wasn't near as high a price as it was in later years.
What do you suppose was your best years in making income from furs? 60s, 70s?
I won't mention any numbers because I don't want to get involved in income tax, but there was times that I probably bought 5,000-6,000 coon in a season, and a lot of muskrats and stuff like that. Of course, the furs were quite high at that time. I paid as much as $65 for some good coon, and I paid $85 for red foxes.
Did your wife ever cook any coon?
Oh, you betcha. She was quite a cook. She was quite a...
With your wife being such a good cook, what was your favorite dish that she would...
Well, she cooked so many good dishes that I wouldn't know what a favorite dish was, but she could really cook good coon and turtle. Now, I had a granddaughter that she's a little bit on the vegetarian side. When her birthday come around, she said, "Grandma," she said, "can you make turtle soup for me?" So I always made it it was her birthday's the 5th of June, so I always try to get a hold of a turtle. Elizabeth would make a big pot of turtle soup, and then she just washed the kettle out after we was done eating because it was all gone. And boy, she could make good turtle soup.
What year did your wife pass away?
96.
1996, and how old was she?
70. She was born in 23, and well, that's 6 years back. I'm 80, 81. She was 3 years younger than me, so she would have been, I don't know, about 75, something like that.
This is a picture of your children.
Yes.
It looks like it was
11 of them there.
11 of them. It looks like it was taken in front of the St. Peter and Paul's
Yes,
Church.
it was.
What was the occasion there? Then?
Beg pardon?
What was the occasion?
That was our 50th anniversary. And luckily, the anniversary actually came on November 23rd, and they set this up in the last part of October, which was convenient for them to come and everything. And we never had a good Saturday after that, but we had a brilliant day for that. Very nice. So we had a big occasion. They had, I think they served over 400 at the reception. We had a big reception in Solon, and Gwenny catered at that time, and boy, we had a big crowd.
And this is the picture of the grandchildren?
Grandchildren, well, some of us else are there too.
Mm-hmm. Are all the grandchildren here on this picture?
No.
They're not all present.
Several were born after this.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Steve's triplets were born, and the little girls were born. At least 6 of them were born after this.
Mm-hmm. Sure. And this is you and Liz later in life. It's not your 50th anniversary, but it's a picture taken later.
I think it could have been the 45th or something like that.
Mm-hmm. After your mother had left, did you ever get a chance to visit with her or see her later?
Oh, yes. Before I got married, I took my fiance and we went to Chicago and visited with her and the relatives there.
Very good. Raphael, if you had your life to live over again, wished you would have done anything different, or was there anything you wished you could have accomplished?
I often think of that, and I guess the way things went, I don't know if I could have done anything different. Mm-hmm. I tried to do the best I could, and with the exception of probably I could have been a little bit more serious about some things than others. But I don't know if I could have done anything different. Like I say, I tried to do the best I could at the time, and that's about all you can expect.
In talking to you, you sounded like a person that truly got as much out of life that you could possibly have gotten.
If I die right now, I've lived a heck of a long time. I've done a lot of things a lot of other people never had a chance to do.
The Linn County History Center, the Cedar Rapids History Center would like to thank you very much for sharing your memories with us.
Well, thank you.
Raphael.